So, Minecraft has auto-crafting now. I've been playing around with this new crafter all day now, and I gotta say, I am absolutely loving this thing, dude. It is so sick. We don't have zoomify on the snapshot, so I had to use the FOV zoom. So just some general information about this thing. You can use a comparator to read a signal strength of up to 9 out of it. You can't get more than 9. You can't get the max 15 like you normally would. And that's because each filled slot of the crafter resembles one signal strength. So if we have all 9 slots full like we do here, then we get the max strength of 9. Whereas over here we only have 2 slots full, so we're only getting a strength of 2. Now this does include disabled slots, so if we go ahead and lock all of these, then we're getting the max strength of 9 again. You can also use hoppers to insert items automatically. So let's just go ahead and unlock this bad boy, and you'll see all of the items flow in, and they actually go in a very specific order. It goes left to right, and then top to bottom. So this is slot number 1 up here, and then down here is slot number 9. So I got this chest full of cobblestone here, and let's say I want to automatically craft furnaces. All I gotta do is lock this middle slot so no cobblestone ends up there, unflip my lever, and now more and more cobblestone will flow in, filling up that recipe. And now every time the crafter receives a redstone signal, it'll craft one time and drop the desired item into whatever inventory is directly in front of it. And if it doesn't have an inventory, it'll just kind of shoot it all over the ground. It pretty much behaves like a dropper, except for the fact that it crafts things. So you know, just much better than a dropper. Now this thing works great for crafting things one at a time, but if you wanted things to craft continuously, you would need this little setup right here. And it's pretty simple actually. It's basically just a modified auto dropper, except the only difference is we have a comparator reading this lectern. When you have a book with 15 pages on the lectern, each page resembles one redstone signal strength. So we have this book set to page 8, and this comparator is on subtraction mode, which means it's subtracting whatever signal strength it's getting from the side from the one it's getting in the back. So the only way we can get this redstone dust to light up is if we're getting a strength of 9 or more from the crafter. And since 9 is the max strength we can get, the second all these slots fill up, the dust will light up, and the sticky piston pushes the observer into this observer, making an observer clock, and the crafter will sit here and try to craft something if it has the correct recipe. And using this concept, I have this little contraption over here for auto-crafting furnaces, and this contraption will actually work for any recipe that only requires one type of ingredient. You just gotta make sure you have all of the correct slots disabled, and it'll start crafting your new item instead. So the only real difference between this setup and that setup is we have this locked hopper right here. Right here we have our input chest and it's full of cobblestone, and if I flip this lever, it'll turn off this redstone torch and unlock that hopper, and now cobblestone can flow freely into the crafter, and every time it gets that max signal strength of 9, the observer shifts over and crafts up a brand new furnace. And the footprint for this thing is actually pretty tiny. I think you could squeeze quite a few of these into your storage halls. Just to further my point about storage halls a little bit, I have this little setup right here. Obviously this one has a couple little cute decorations, but the difference here is it's extending further backwards instead of on the sides like over here. And I think that'll make it just a little bit easier to tile these things next to each other. So you can pretty much just copy and paste the setup right next to it, put another crafter down, another chest, some stone bricks to cover up the redstone, and you get the idea. You can just keep going on and on and on. Let's say this one's for furnaces, this one's for cobblestone slabs, another one down here for cobblestone stairs. So pretty much getting a full array of auto crafters just generating building blocks for you is going to be pretty freaking easy. So single ingredient recipes are pretty easy. What about more complex recipes? And that brings me to this behemoth right over here. This is my bulk TNT auto crafter. It is important to note that this should work with pretty much any recipe in the game. I just have it set up for TNT because that's one of those things that we all craft a ton of, and it's such a pain to do so every single time. Now this thing does have 2 different modes. You press the button here for manual mode, and that'll just craft up 1 TNT at a time, or if you flip the lever, it'll just continue to craft for as long as it possibly can. But more on that a little later. Let's explain the nitty-gritty about this thing real quick. So we have 9 double chests and 9 droppers, and each double chest and dropper pair resembles 1 slot of the crafter or 1 ingredient of the recipe. And the order of the chests does matter, so this chest right here resembles slot number 1, and then this one way down here resembles slot number 9 of the crafter. Each one of these droppers is facing down into a barrel, which is kind of acting as a bit of a throttle before it gets down to the main hopper input line down here. So every time we press this button, it'll activate all 9 droppers at the same time, and 1 set of ingredients will make their way through the hopper line one by one, and that ensures that the crafter gets all the ingredients in the correct order. Whereas if we try to do something like this, when I unlock the hopper, it'll just start putting items in willy-nilly, which is why I have this little system here to ensure that the items make it to the crafter one at a time. And as we saw before, the second it gets all 9 ingredients, it automatically crafts 1 more TNT. So that's manual mode. But like I said, this thing also has an automatic mode, which is probably a bit more interesting. So if I flip this lever here, it'll activate this hopper clock, which only has 6 items flowing through it. And every time this redstone block moves over, it sends a pulse to all of our droppers, which sends the crafter a brand new set of ingredients. Now this was the tricky part right here. Basically, I wanted to have a system in place that'll detect if one of our droppers empties out and cuts power to the hopper clock. So let's say this dropper right here empties out, it turns on this redstone torch, which powers the redstone dust, and extends our sticky piston, which has a redstone block, and then turns off our hopper clock, which will prevent our droppers from sending incomplete recipes down here to the crafter and making it a big jumbled mess in here. And the second the dropper gets more sand, the redstone torch goes back off, the hopper clock turns back on, and the crafter goes back to receiving ingredients. And this torch right here on the end is hooked up to our lever, so if we turn this back off, this torch turns back on, so does the redstone dust, and the sticky piston will again cut power to the hopper clock. So this lever doesn't actually turn the machine on, it more so turns off the hopper clock. And another big thing I wanted with this design was to be able to have a nice user interface, so I made sure that all of the droppers and barrels were backed up a little bit, so that way you could come through with your stone bricks or whatever block you like and just cover all of that up, and you're left with something like this, which is actually a pretty clean look, I think. And like I said earlier, this machine should work for just about any recipe. You just gotta make sure you have the ingredients in the right slots. So you would do something like this if you wanted to autocraft pistons. And you could take it a step further by adding a little bit of a splitter, which will take sand from the top chest and split it fairly equally into the bottom 4 chests. Or like over here, you could keep all 9 chests, just like we do over there. But over here, we have a series of item filters, ensuring that only the correct ingredient will go into the corresponding chest. And then I have a little minecart track here just for distribution. 1 chest is for gunpowder, and the other chest is for sand. You could also introduce shulker box loaders or unloaders. I mean, the options for this are pretty infinite, dude, and it's just day 1. I cannot wait to see what people smarter than me are coming up with. By the way, this is actually one of the hardest videos I've ever had to make. There's a reason why I don't make tutorials. It's because I suck at explaining things. Like I actually need a tutorial for making tutorials.